The architect of silence, the last of his kind. Deep inside the Amazon rainforest, within the indigenous territory of Tanar'u, the canopy is a ceiling of interlocking leaves, a vaulted cathedral so dense it strangles the sunlight before it touches the earth. Here, in the western state of Rondônia, the heat is not just a temperature, it is a physical weight. It presses against the skin, damp and suffocating, smelling of ancient rot and violent bloom. The air hums with the relentless cacophony of insects, a chaotic, screeching orchestra that usually drowns out everything else. But in one specific sector of this green hell, there was a silence that felt heavy, deliberate, and unnatural. To the outside world, the Tanar'u territory was a dark patch on a map, an island of forest besieged by an ocean of soy plantations and cattle ranches. But inside, it was a fortress. For decades, satellites orbiting the planet captured anomalies that baffled the Brazilian authorities at FUNAI, the National Indian Foundation. Their lenses, trained to spot illegal logging or mining, instead zoomed in on something mathematically impossible: a single patch of organized chaos in a sea of green. The images revealed small, distinct clearings. In the middle of the untamed wilderness, there were gardens. Not the accidental clusters of wild fruit, but cultivated rows of maize and papaya, planted with a geometric precision that suggested a disciplined, intelligent mind at work. Near these gardens, a thatched hut would appear, standing for months, only to be abruptly abandoned and reclaimed by the fast-growing jungle, while a new one appeared miles away. To the researchers examining the grain of the photos in Brasilia, it looked like the work of a ghost. There were no trails leading in from the riverbanks. There were no trade paths connecting to known settlements. There were no smoke signals rising above the trees to communicate with neighbors. Whatever was down there was completely, terrifiedly alone. The data defied logic. Indigenous tribes in the Amazon, even uncontacted ones, rarely exist in isolation of one. They are communal. They have families, elders, warriors. They leave footprints, both literal and metaphorical. But this figure moved through the forest with the lightness of a phantom. He did not clear the forest, he manicured it. He did not conquer his environment, he haunted it. Before a single boot touched the ground to investigate, the man of the hole had already established his legend. He was the architect of silence, constructing a reality where he was the sole citizen, the king, and the prisoner. He was surviving in a place where humans were never meant to be solitary, defying the laws of social evolution. The satellite images were not just proof of life. They were evidence of resistance. Someone was down there, refusing to die, refusing to be seen, and meticulously curating a life in the shadows of a world that believed him to be extinct. The phantom in the trees. When the first ground expedition finally cut its way into the Tanar'u territory in 1996, the forest did not welcome them. It felt less like exploration and more like an intrusion into a sanctuary. The team, comprised of seasoned FUNAI trackers and hardened Sertanistas, moved with the heavy, hacking rhythm of machetes against vines, sweating through their fatigues in the breathless humidity. They were armed with GPS trackers and satellite imagery, but the moment they stepped under the canopy, technology felt obsolete. They were entering a zone where the rules of time had been suspended. For days, they found nothing but the oppressive density of the jungle. But then, the signs began to appear, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. A broken twig here, snapped at a height only a human would reach. A patch of earth disturbed where a foot had pivoted. These were not the chaotic trails of tapirs or jaguars. They were deliberate. He was moving, and he was close. The game of shadows. The researchers soon realized they were engaged in a spectral game of cat and mouse, but the roles were reversed. They were the clumsy giants crashing through the undergrowth, while their target moved with the silence of smoke. The trackers reported eerie phenomena. They would find a fresh footprint in the mud, broad, calloused, with splayed toes indicating a lifetime without shoes, only for the tracks to vanish abruptly at a stream's edge, never reappearing on the opposite bank. It was as if he had dissolved into the water. At night, the psychological weight of the expedition grew heavier. Experienced guards swore they heard the snap of dry wood just beyond the firelight. Some felt the prickling sensation of being watched, a gaze that was intense, fearful, and unblinking. They called out greetings in various indigenous dialects, Tupi, Kino, Akuntsu, hoping for recognition. The only response was the wind moving through the palm fronds. The silence was absolute, and it was a rejection. The hut and the abyss. On the fifth day, they broke through a wall of vines into a small, sun-drenched clearing. There, standing defiant against the chaos of the jungle, was a maloka, a rectangular hut made of palm thatch and wood. It was empty. The ashes in the small fire pit were cold, but not old. He had been here. He had likely heard them coming miles away and vanished into the green wall. The team entered the hut cautiously, their boots crunching on the packed earth floor. The structure was neat, functional, and heartbreakingly solitary. A hammock woven from tree bark, a crude arrow fletched with macaw feathers. But in the center of the floor, hidden under palm leaves, lay the discovery that would define his existence. It was a hole, but to call it a hole was a disservice to the labor involved. It was a precise, rectangular shaft, carved vertically into the earth. One of the researchers shone a flashlight down into the darkness. The beam hit the bottom, revealing a depth of nearly 6 feet. The walls were shaved smooth, scraped by hand or simple tools with surgical precision. It was too narrow to lie down and comfortably, too deep to easily climb out of without effort. The purpose was indecipherable, and that was what made it terrifying. Was it a trap? At the bottom of similar holes found later, sharpened stakes were discovered, pungy sticks capable of impaling a wild boar or a jaguar. Was it a bunker? A place to crouch and hide while the bullets of loggers flew overhead, a trauma response etched into the soil? Was it spiritual? Some anthropologists later whispered that it looked like a birth canal or perhaps a grave waiting for a body. The hole was not just a piece of engineering. It was a scar. It was the mark of a man who felt unsafe on the surface of the earth. Standing on the edge of that abyss, the researchers realized they weren't dealing with a wild human. They were tracking a man who had been hunted so severely that he had tried to build a world underground. They had found his home, but the phantom was already gone, leaving behind only the hollow echo of his fear in the ground. The echo of genocide when the world ended. If the expedition's initial findings were unsettling, what the investigators discovered next was devastating. The cold, brutal story of how an individual became the last of his kind. It was not disease, nor hunger, but greed and violence that claimed his tribe. The Tanara territory was not just a jungle. It was the epicenter of a war. In the 80s and 90s, the land rush in Rondonia reached its peak. Ranchers and illegal loggers, armed and lawless, viewed the indigenous people not as neighbors, but as obstacles to be removed. The night of fire and lead, fragmented testimonies collected from isolated neighboring tribes and repentant outlaws on the frontier painted a harrowing picture. There was no warning. The attack came under the cloak of darkness while the tribes slept. They were flashes of fire amidst the primordial darkness, followed by the dry, echoing crack of gunfire piercing the dense humidity of the forest. It was not a confrontation. It was an extermination. Men, women, and children were hunted down and slaughtered. To completely erase the evidence, the bodies were quickly buried in mass graves dug by heavy machinery or thrown into rivers. The land was then cleared and burned to make way for pasture. The underground refuge. The man of the hole was not spared by luck. He survived by instinct and, crucially, by his underground architecture. He had already developed the habit of digging, perhaps for traps or hideouts. During the attack, amidst the chaos and the smell of smoke and gunpowder, he crawled into one of his holes, pressing himself into the dark, damp earth. 4 days, perhaps a week, he remained there, the noise of tractors and the smell of fresh blood above him. When he finally emerged from his pit, he found no life. The village was gone. replaced by an unholy silence. The fire had taken the houses and the memory. His entire world was reduced to rubble and an unrecognizable landscape. The oath of silence. The trauma did not drive him to madness, but to a steely resolve. The outside world, the one that spoke and moved in groups, was the enemy. They had taken his home, his people, and most importantly, his voice. From that moment on, solitude became his armor and silence his only language. He never tried to make contact again. He did not join other tribes. Instead, he became a nomad of grief, traversing his ancestral territory, where every tree, every stream, carried the ghost of a loved one. The forest, once the home of many, became the lonely and claustrophobic refuge of one. His life's work turned into an obsession, surviving to ensure that the murder of his people was not in vain, digging holes not just to hide, but as symbolic tombs for the culture he was forced to carry alone. His escape was not an act of cowardice, but the first and last act of resistance against cultural genocide. He became the silent guardian of a cemetery that stretched for thousands of hectares. The refusal. When a government agency, FUNE, finally located him, they attempted a delicate dance of contact. They left gifts, steel machetes, axes, seeds, and food. His response was visceral and heartbreaking. The food was left to rot. The tools were occasionally taken, but more often abandoned. When a researcher got too close in 2004, an arrow flew from the brush, striking him in the chest. A desperate, terrifying message: leave me to my solitude. He had seen the face of humanity, and he wanted no part of it. He lived like a shadow, always watching, always migrating. He built 53 huts over the decades, and in every single one, he dug his hole. Perhaps he was trapping animals. Perhaps he was hiding from the nightmares of the past. Or perhaps, as some anthropologists theorized, he was digging a womb in the earth, a connection to the ancestors who were buried there, the only company he had left. The Silent Guardian. The Brazilian government eventually sealed off 8,000 hectares of forest, declaring it a restricted zone solely for him. It became a sanctuary for a population of one. Guards stationed at the perimeter reported chilling phenomena. They would wake up to find their own footprints tracked. They felt eyes watching them from the dense foliage, a gaze that felt ancient and judging. Trespassers who dared enter the zone often fled, claiming the forest itself turned against them. Paths looping back on themselves, silence falling like a suffocating blanket. The man of the hole had become the forest's immune system, purging anything that threatened his existence. The final shelter. In August 2022, the rhythm of the forest changed. The subtle signs of his movement, the broken twigs, the harvested maize ceased. The jungle grew unusually still, as if holding its breath. When officials cautiously approached his final shelter, they did not find a man fleeing. They found a scene of profound dignity. He was lying in a hammock. He was decked out in macaw feathers, ornaments that held spiritual significance only he understood. He had not died suddenly. He had prepared for it. Sensing his end approaching, he had dressed himself in his finest regalia and laid down to wait for the dark. There were no signs of violence, no struggle, just the quiet end of a timeline that stretched back thousands of years. The hole in our conscience. The last member of the tribe was gone. With his final breath, an entire universe vanished. An intricate grammatical structure, a vast encyclopedia of medicinal plants, a unique creation myth, and a specific way of laughing or grieving. All of it disappeared instantly, never to be recovered. He serves as a devastating reminder of fragility. He spent decades digging holes in the Amazonian soil, perhaps trying to find safety in a world that had offered him none. But in the end, the deepest hole he left was not in the ground. It is the void left in the human tapestry, a hole in our collective conscience where an entire culture used to be. His name remained a secret for years, until it was revealed by indigenous people who told the story and knew his name, Giacomo Mandini. His voice was never recorded, but his silence is the loudest accusation the forest has ever screamed.